It's that time of the month where I wrap up all of the amazing books that I read in October. So I am here today with my October yes, no, or maybe reading wrap up. I read 11 books in total this month, so it was a really great month reading wise. I also had a very great reading month in terms of the rating. These are all 3 stars or higher. So I'm going to say right off the bat, none of these are a strict no. But so all of these are either a yes or maybe. So I've been really blessed this year with some amazing reads. So without further ado, let's hop into my kind of spooky fall books I read this month. The first book I finished this month was The Spirit Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez, and I will say definitely yes on this one. I really understand why people had a hard time describing the plot of this novel, because it is very hard to describe. It's very dreamlike in a way that usually that doesn't work for me, but it really worked in this one. The use of switching back and forth between second and third person in this was super interesting, and it really paralleled the 2 different kind of timelines we have going on with the narrator of the story and as his grandma's telling this story, and then this more fantastical tale of these 2 boys going on an adventure. This was perfect for this time of year, super atmospheric. I had been putting off for a long time because I was super intimidated by it, but I'm really glad I finally got to it, and I definitely understand why people say this is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read, because the writing style of this just completely transported me, and I grew to love the 2 main characters at the center of the journey in this book with my entire heart. They are so precious to me. So I definitely highly recommend this. If you are a fantasy reader, highly, highly recommend. It's a standalone, so it's just 1 book. But even if you're not a fantasy reader, I think this is still a great place to start. And then I picked up The Inheritance of Arcadia Divina, which I rated 4 stars. This is about a matriarch of a family, Arcadia Divina, and she calls all of her extended children and grandchildren, her huge extended family, to her home because she's going to die and she wants to give them their inheritance. There's dual timelines, so you hear in the present timeline from her inheritors, mainly her grandchildren, and then there's a past timeline of Arcadia Divina's childhood and teenagehood and young adulthood that kind of makes you understand why she was the way she was. I ended up really, really enjoying this. I got this as a Christmas gift, and I had been saving it for the fall time because I figured it'd be really good fall vibes, and it definitely was. I was hesitant about picking it up because the plot didn't sound like something that super piqued my interest. But if you're like me and the plot doesn't sound super interesting, I would still highly recommend picking this up because I loved the characters a lot more than I thought I would. I'm not usually a huge magical realism person, but the atmosphere in this really transported me. It's the second time I've said this, but I really hit the mark with the atmospheric reads this month, which I'm really happy about because I am very much an atmosphere reader. So that was great. And I loved the Latin American representation in this too. The huge Latin American family was super great to read about. So yeah, I thought Arcadia Divina was a super interesting character, and there's a lot of really short chapters in this, so it did not take me very long to read it all either. So I absolutely flew through this. So definitely I would say yes on this, honestly, which was probably my biggest surprise of this month. And then on audiobook, I finished No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole, which I rated 3.5 stars. However, I would still say yes. I think you should pick this up. It is a psychological thriller about the gentrification of a Brooklyn neighborhood. A Black woman and her white male neighbor, team up to figure out why their neighbors seem to be disappearing. So I've been saving this again for the fall time because I'm not a huge thriller reader because I'm kind of a scaredy cat. But if I'm going to read it, October is always the time I like to pick them up. I definitely think if you're like me and you're not a huge thriller reader because you don't really like super, super scary things, I definitely recommend this. If you're more of a slasher type of thriller person where you need like a little bit of guts and gore, I would say this probably isn't for you. If you're, a more intense seasoned thriller reader, this might not be very like surprising or thrilling to you, but for me, as a non-thriller reader, I really enjoyed it, and I really like horror when it's used as a commentary on social issues, and so for me, that really hit in this, the parallels of the horror to the actual horror of gentrification in historically Black neighborhoods was super interesting. So I think it's worth it just for that alone, even if, you're not as maybe surprised or spooked out by the thrilling elements as I might have been. And then I finished another audiobook after that because this was a really short one, and that was Graveyard Shift by Emma Rio. This is a novella, so super quick, but I do unfortunately think that was a little bit of a disservice to it, so I rated this 3 stars. I would say maybe read this if you are a, like, vibes but no plot type of reader, and you're not as much of a character-driven reader. I struggled with this because I was really, really wanting, like, a good found family in this, because that's what it was kind of marketed as. The plot is that there's this unlikely group of friends, and they meet in this graveyard every single night because they are all, tend to be awake in the night hours for whatever reason. Most of them struggle with insomnia. And so I was really excited about the premise. I really liked If We Were Villains by Emma Rio, and that plot sounded really interesting to me because I love a good found family. I love a group of unlikely characters, finding connection. But unfortunately, I think partly because of the length of this, it was so short, and a lot of this is devoted to the mystery of this hole that's in the ground at the graveyard. I felt really distant from this. So if you are like me and you are a super character-driven reader, this probably won't really hit for you, unfortunately. But I do think Emma Rio's atmosphere is great for this time of year. So if you're just looking for like a kind of eerie graveyard set book just to read really quickly before, the end of fall officially, I did rate this 3 stars, so not the worst thing I've read, but definitely a little bit disappointing for what I was expecting. And then I finished Into the Light by Marco Shiro, which I rated 3 stars, I believe. This is about a young boy who kind of ends up being, like, taken in by this family while he's on the run from a cult, but he has very complicated feelings because he's also trying to save his sister from the religious cult that he escaped of sorts. And there's 2 different timelines, so you're kind of unraveling what might have happened in the past that led him to where he is in the present. So again, kind of a very fast-paced, mysterious, thrilling book for this time of year. It has queer elements because the main character is queer. It has a, slow burn love story of sorts with the son of the family. But I would say this is a maybe. I think it's a really important read, but I think you should definitely check the trigger warnings for this before you read it, because this deals with some really dark things that, again, I think are important to discuss, but might not be for everybody. But if you think you can handle it, I do think this is definitely really worth reading. And I have really enjoyed everything by Marco Shiro. I really love their writing style. They always have so much heart in their books where I feel like I'm there in it with the main character. So I always leave their books feeling a little bit like I've gone through a therapy session in a way, which can be very cathartic. But you do need to be mentally prepared for that. So just know that going in. But if that is your type of read, highly recommend this. And then I kind of pivoted to a very different read, which was The Inferno by Dante. the classic written in 1300, which I rated 4 out of 5 stars. I highly recommend this, actually. I really enjoyed it. I think you should read it. This very simplistic plot of sorts, in that it is a kind of poem, fictional recounting of Dante's journey into hell, guided by Virgil. One of my goals this year was to read more classic literature, and so this was the most recent book on my quest to do that. And I read this in preparation for the next book I'm going to talk about, but I figured I would enjoy it, but I actually enjoyed this even more than I expected to. For me, actually, even though I'm a character-driven reader, the characters wasn't the strongest part of this, but I think that this had so much commentary that it left me thinking, and I still am thinking about it, even, a week later. So I'm really glad I read this version specifically, the Robert Hollander translation, because after each canto or chapter, there was a, 3 to 5 page commentary on it, kind of dissecting all of the different references, giving historical context, which I found super helpful, because I think 90% of the stuff that was in that commentary would have just flown over my head. So I think with that extra context, it made me appreciate this even more. And I think this was super worth reading, just because I could see how this inspired so many other books and stories. And as someone who's a huge fan of the hero's journey, I think it's also interesting to look through that lens. So yeah, really glad I read this. Highly recommend if you're looking for a classic book. Honestly, it's not that hard to read. It's, most of it's in prose, or not in prose, in verse. So the actual text of it is not that hard to read. So I think it's definitely accessible if you're wanting to get into more classics, especially this time of year. And then to follow this up, I immediately picked up Calabasas by R.F. Kuang, which I rated 5 out of 5 stars. I know there's been conflicting takes on this, but I think everybody should read it, because this for me was nearly a perfect book. This was my most anticipated book of this year, and I was so correct for that, because this was everything I could have wanted in a book. Basically as perfect of a novel as you can get, in my opinion. It follows Peter and Alice, and they are doctor students at Cambridge, and they travel into hell to rescue their academic advisor who has passed away, so that he can continue to be their advisor. And so this is chock full, I tabbed it so much, of references to the Inferno, but also other classic stories of going to hell, such as Orpheus and Eurydice from Greek mythology. And so this is super fun to read and catch all of those little references. I think this is a really great balance between the commentary and the love story between Alice and Peter. This is not a romance, and I think some people had that misconception going in, but it is a love story. So, there are romantic elements, but it's definitely not the main point. So I think I had that expectation going in, so I think they made it more enjoyable to me. But honestly, there was a lot more romantic elements in this than I thought, based on reviews. And so I was very satisfied. I loved Peter and Alice's dynamic so much. This was kind of the perfect read for October, because it was just spooky enough for me. And I did a whole review unpacking this on my page, and I also did a separate review for the Inferno as well. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts on all of the little niche references and specific scenes I thought contributed to the commentary, both of those, go check out those videos on my page. But I think Kuang was just so genius with how she used her rendition of hell to make commentary on how academia is hell. There was so many little things she did that just blew my mind. So I left this feeling very satisfied, and I really enjoyed this. So I have a long 10-minute review for this and for Inferno, so go check those out if you want to know more thoughts. And then I finished Private Rights by Julia Armfeld on audiobook, which I rated 3 out of 5 stars. I would say maybe if you are a literary fiction reader and you really liked Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfeld, by the author, because I think the writing style was very similar to it. And I did find the characters interesting, but I think my issue with this was that the characters felt a little bit too similar in my mind, so I had a hard time differentiating them, which made this a little bit tricky to read. But I did really like the themes of sisterhood in this, tense sisterhood. And then I picked up Private Rights by Julie Armfeld on audiobook, which I rated 3 out of 5 stars. I was a bit disappointed by this because her other book, Our Wives Under the Sea, was a 5 out of 5 stars for me. I adore that novel. And this had a very similar atmospheric writing style, but I didn't connect with the characters as much in this one because the 3 characters, we get all of their perspectives, and they were similar enough to me that I was having kind of a difficult time differentiating the two, unfortunately. So this did not hit quite as much for me as Our Wives Under the Sea. But if you are a literary fiction reader, you might still enjoy this. And I did really enjoy the themes of sisterhood. There was a lot of commentary on different roles that sisters take based on their age, and having the presentation of complicated sister relationships always means a lot to me. So if that's also something you're looking for, I did really like the commentary in this. And then I read Leaving the Station by Jake Maya Arlo, which I rated 4 out of 5 stars. I would say this is a maybe. Jake kind of writes books perfectly for me. So it's hard for me to unbiasedly rate their books because each one of them has had something that just about me that feels like I'm seeing myself represented for the first time, which is really cool. But this is a kind of romance, kind of contemporary. It's not super romance. But it's set on over the course of a 4-day train ride, so almost all of it takes place on a train, which was super interesting, and you get flashbacks to the main character's first semester at Cornell College, kind of coming into their gender identity. And this book, combined with seeing Lord's concert the same day that I was reading this, made me think a lot of thoughts. The way that the main character talked about their gender really, really resonated with me. And it was also really cool because the train this was set on is the same train that I take back and forth a lot from my hometown to where I was going to school and back. So, the exact same train. So, and I read it on the train coming back from the concert on the same train that it's set on. So that was kind of wild. So I think if you are an older teen, someone in their early 20s, sapphic, kind of having gender crisis, gender questioning, I would recommend this to you, because for me it really hit, but I think it is going to hit for a very specific subset of people. I don't think Jake's writing style necessarily works for everybody because it is maybe a little bit juvenile at times, but I think I just reminded myself that the character's 18 and reminded me a lot of my first semester of college and how I thought at 18. And then I also read Dowry of Blood, which I rated 3 out of 5 stars. I would say this is a maybe. I did not expect this. This was a novella going in. It was a lot shorter than I was expecting. And so I do think the author, which I cannot think of right now, I do think they pack a lot of plot into a short amount of time, and I do think for the length of the novel, I think the character work was really well done, and I really liked the like second person letter writing style of this. So in that way, I really liked it, and I was very engaged with the plot. And I did really like the like bisexual representation. This is about, it's from the perspective of one of the wives of Dracula. And it's like a polyamorous bisexual situation where Dracula then takes on other wives and husbands, and they all become like a family. But it's really interesting because Dracula's never actually named. He's just referred to as you because the narrator's writing letters to, or narrating it to, the character of Dracula. So he's never actually named, which is super interesting. So I think I was just wanting a little bit more from the setting, and then just like in general, like wanting more of a story. So I felt like just a little bit unsatisfied. I liked what was in there, but I think it just felt like a little bit too like slice of life for me, a little bit, in a way for me to like put this like 4 or 5 star range. But I'm still really glad I read it, and I meant to read it last October, didn't get to it, so I'm really glad I got it in this October because it's also perfect for Spooky Month. And then the last book I finished this month, we're almost there, a lot. I'm sorry I'm talking so much, but it was Stiff by Mary Roach, which I rated 3 out of 5 stars. This is a nonfiction book about the life of cadavers. So, super interesting premise. I would say maybe on this. I think some people would be, if you're really squeamish, I would say probably not. I made the mistake. I don't know why every single morning I usually listen to an audiobook while I'm eating breakfast. I did that with this one, and why did I keep eating breakfast while I was eating this? Because that was not the move, but other than that, for me, it was fine. But if you are super squeamish about body parts, probably not the one for you, but it was a very interesting subject, very interesting to read for October. I really love it when a nonfiction writer dives into a very niche subject and writes like a whole book about it. So I know a lot more about cadavers and what happens to bodies after they die now. So yeah, I definitely learned a lot. And Mary Roach's writing style, this is the first book I've read by her. But I've been wanting to read a book by her for a while because my mom really likes her. And so if you like more humorous writing style in your nonfiction, I also highly recommend this because Mary Roach is really funny too in the way that she narrates things. So if that is your cup of tea, I definitely recommend this, and I think this is definitely also accessible for somebody who doesn't read a lot of nonfiction. I think this is a really fun way to start. So yeah. So that was everything I read in the month of October. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Nothing I didn't like. Some things I felt a little lukewarm on, some things I loved, but overall, really good reading month. Read a lot. All very on brand for October, which I'm really happy with. So please let me know what you read in October, what your favorite read was, because I'd love to know, and start making my TBR for next year. Hope to see you again soon.